They clapped as if it were a performance. Wine chipped the silence into tinkling fragments. Laughter circled the ballroom and landed like knives. Ethan Caldwell sat by the piano. His hands rested on ivory, not to play but to steady himself. He wore a tailored suit and the same darkness he'd worn since he was a child. No sight. He listened. He catalogued voices. He counted footsteps. He could feel the hum of the chandelier through the floorboards. "You should be seen with him," one guest said, loud and slow, tasting his cruelty. "Makes you look charitable." Aaliyah Johnson stood by the doorway with a tray of petits fours. Her palms were damp. The perfume in the room smelled of expensive roses and old money. The air was thick with the heat of bodies and an easy arrogance that belonged to generations. Aaliyah had scrubbed this house since she was 16. She knew the squeak of every stair, the way the curtains gathered dust in the second study. She knew how people, good people, could be kind and yet hollow at the same time. "Miss Johnson," Richard Caldwell barked from across the room. His voice was the brittle kind that snapped. "Bring Ethan his water. Don't stare." Aaliyah moved. Her steps were practiced, quiet. Up close, Ethan smelled faintly of eucalyptus and childhood, of the brand of soap the household always bought. He reached out, seeking with the blind certainty of habit. "Keep your hands to yourself," a woman near the piano whispered, but loud enough. "You don't want to be seen fussing." "It looks common," Ethan heard the word. Common. He felt it like a pressure behind his ribs. He had money. He had a name on property deeds. He had a father whose face the city took seriously. Still, in a crowded room of mirrors and champagne, he was reduced to spectacle. A human being on display because he could not see their disdain. Aaliyah's eyes flicked to him. She had seen worse. The sideways glances on buses, the cashier who asked for ID when everyone else paid with a smile, the boy who crossed the street at night. Shame settled in her throat. But there was something else, low and sharp, a stubborn, private refusal to bow. She stepped closer. Her fingers brushed his wrist as she handed him the glass. He turned his face toward her voice. They both felt the contact, sudden, ordinary, and electric. The room whispered on. The music swelled. Outside, a siren wound through the Atlanta humidity and then faded. Aaliyah hesitated. Her thumb found the soft skin beneath Ethan's eye. She rubbed a small, trembling motion. No one paid attention. Or so they thought. Ethan's breath caught. A light, impossible and thin, seemed to press at the back of his lids. For a single heartbeat, the world held its breath with him. But this was only the beginning. The house smelled of lemon oil and oak. Morning light slanted through plantation shutters, slicing the foyer into warm bars. It was a house that told its age in polished banisters and the soft creak of a floorboard in the west wing. It was also a stage. A script had been written for every actor who crossed its threshold. Aaliyah Johnson woke before the sun. Her alarm was already a habit. 4:20, quiet enough not to wake the Caldwell nursery staff. There were no nursery sounds now. Ethan sometimes slept in a room converted into an office, and sometimes in an auditorium for visitors who wanted to see the wealthy blind boy. He slept in the small world he owned, and the larger world that owned him. She folded her uniform the way she had learned from other women who taught her how to survive under white ceilings. The uniform was clean, navy blue with a white collar. It was a small armor. Aaliyah kissed the top of her sleeping son's head, Marcus Jr., who snored like a freight train, and left a note for her mother stuck to the fridge. Little rituals, little guarantees. In a house with 1,000 opinions, these were the things she kept for herself. Outside, the city smelled of summer heat and cooked coffee. Atlanta pulsed. Buses stitched neighborhoods together, morning vendors called the day into being, and somewhere a gospel choir tuned up for Sunday. Aaliyah boarded the Blue Line, the strap of her bag an honest strap. She stood close to a woman who smelled of hair oil and ambition. A man gave her a look that held suspicion, then looked away like he had been startled by his own thought. She arrived at the Caldwell estate at 6:25. The gate guard knew her by the sound of her footsteps now. He opened the gate with the same automatic courtesy he gave every other employee. The gate didn't open with the same courtesy to the neighborhood behind it, where rent notices and fights over utilities lived. The gate, like everything else, separated things that the city pretended could stay separate. Inside, she started the day as she always did, straightening photographs, polishing brass, making sure the house smelled like money and not the mess of 1,000 lives. The walls held portraits of Caldwells, ancestors in powdered wigs, later in stern suits, then in more modern tailored blazers, cropped photographs with engraved frames that whispered continuity. She dusted fingers over the frames and thought of her own mother, whose picture existed only as a Polaroid tucked in a dresser drawer. She straightened. Ethan's stack of newspapers. He liked to keep headlines near his bed so he could ask someone to read to him in the mornings and put fresh water by his nightstand. Ethan rose from bed the way he always did, with a map in his head. His apartment within the house had the routes memorized, the angles of corners recorded in muscle memory. He knew when carpets were replaced by wood because his footfall changed. He knew when the air smelled of orange oil because his father was preparing for guests. This intimacy with the house was both a comfort and a cage. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," Aaliyah said softly as she set the paper down. His voice from the bedroom was always immediate, present without the filter of a gaze. "Morning," Ethan answered. His voice carried curiosity like a lamp. "Did Richard check the Bronson ledger last night?" "No, sir. He was on the phone until late. He said you could keep the paper." Ethan smiled, a slight tilt that she could feel in the warmth of his words. "Thank you." He reached for the glass. When they spoke alone, there was an ease that rarely survived other rooms. Their voices were unadorned. They could be honest. Ethan asked questions about things he could not see, what the garden looked like now in spring, how the light hit the piano at noon. And she would tell him with the attention of someone painting with words. It felt criminal to tell him the whole city smelled of hot asphalt and exhaust. So some mornings she painted loftier images, the azaleas in bloom, the way sunlight could make dust look like stars. She wanted to give him color because he could not reach it. She wanted him to have a world that was not only read to him, but constructed in the language of someone who noticed corners others ignored. Outside the house, Richard Caldwell made his own map. His ledgers were precise arithmetic. His kindnesses were investments. He ran Caldwell Holdings with a smile that seemed to imply compliance. He bragged about his philanthropy in the ways men of his position do, donations with press releases, foundations with logos that looked like goodwill. When he spoke about the city, he used words like vibrancy and investment, while property managers used words like relocation. Business wins today. "Ethan," he told his son over breakfast, the kind of sentence that was intended to soothe and command. "We're closing on the Brookhaven site." "The council's been very cooperative." Ethan's response was soft. "Do you think the community will be all right?" Richard laughed, a slight brittle sound. "You ask too many questions," he said, and the laugh cut. "There are decisions to make. We make them. People adapt," Ethan wanted to argue. He tried to unspool the words into a conversation about responsibility. But responsibility weighed that house that he hadn't learned to lift. He could feel the chair under him. He could not feel the ledger's effect on the people whose block it would change. He wanted to be more than a son with a blindfold stitched into his life. On the surface, life at the Caldwell estate was polished and managed. Underneath were the small things that showed their seam. Aaliyah, who handled the silverware and social schedule, noticed how guests lingered only on the periphery of Ethan's presence. They wanted to be seen with him, as the hook had shown. They wanted the moral photograph, charity with a safe distance. They visited his room for curiosity, but never for communion. Then there were the small cruelties people assumed were invisible. At a charity gala, a hostess had guided Aaliyah aside. She instructed her to stay out of sight because Mr. Caldwell gets uncomfortable with servants in social spaces. The phrase was soft and efficient. The meaning was not. Aaliyah had laughed as if it were a joke. That night, the laughter stayed lodged in her throat like an unswallowed stone. If someone had asked her what she wanted, she might have said, the right to exist without apology. But the world did not hand out small, honest things without making them seem like theft. So she kept dreaming in margins, night classes at the community college, studying to become a licensed practical nurse, writing a certificate number on applications at the kitchen table when the house slept and the city lived loud. Those dreams were guarded. Aaliyah carried them like a secret talisman. Marcus Rivera arrived on a gray Tuesday with a bag of bagels and the kind of grin Aaliyah had learned to trust. Marcus worked at the vintage camera shop 2 blocks from Aaliyah's apartment. His mother was from Queens, his father from Puerto Rico. The isthmus of their identity made him a walking contradiction in the best way. Loud, tender, and stubborn. He had a history with the Caldwell estate. Not everyone who grew up in the neighborhood forgot the Caldwells. But Marcus knew Ethan differently. He and Ethan had met at a tactile poetry reading at an art space downtown, an odd pairing of the wealthy son and the photographer from the block. Their friendship had formed around a shared hunger for the language of things, Marcus with pictures and Ethan with descriptions. "Morning, Allie," Marcus said, tugging at the strap of his bag. "You look like you survived another morning with the Royals." She laughed, quick and dry. "You sound bitter." "I am," he said, "but only in small doses. How's Ethan today?" "Quiet. He wanted you to bring that camera you fixed for him." She cocked her head. "He wants to feel it." Marcus's hand brushed hers when he took a cup of coffee. The touch lasted long enough to be called a hello and short enough to be called safe. He had always been a friend who showed up when the world tried to forget them. At lunchtime, Aaliyah walked the staff corridor to the kitchen where the other domestic staff gathered. Conversations there were different, raw and honest. They spoke about bills, about kids, about the quiet humiliations that came from cleaning spaces that had never been truly theirs. They swapped stories about guests who left gifts with conditions. They laughed at things that had no humor and told stories as if memory could be refashioned into armor. Over the next week, small events threaded into their lives like a quiet seam. Richard, in a board meeting, congratulated himself on the city's progress as if he had built it single-handedly. A landlord on Peachtree lost a tenant after Caldwell Holdings bought and flipped several units, news that reached the staff through a hushed conversation and a paper headline. Aaliyah's neighbor, Mrs. Carter, left a note in the mailroom about a property tax increase. The world outside the gates was changing rapidly, and inside the gates, the changes were presented as improvements. One evening after a charity dinner, Aaliyah lingered in the parlor to gather glassware. The house had emptied, and in the gold-filtered twilight, the furniture looked like it could breathe. Ethan sat by the piano, fingers trailing over keys he rarely played in public. He had music transcribed into Braille and listened to hours of recordings. Sometimes he improvised. His hands spoke. "Do you ever want to be somewhere else?" Aaliyah asked, folding a napkin with economy. Ethan paused. "Everywhere," he said. He laughed softly, the sound a little sharper than usual. "Do you?" She folded the napkin like a secret boat. "Sometimes. I think about school. I think about getting certified. I think about a life where my son tells me he's proud of what I did because I did it for me, not because I did it for someone who checks boxes." His fingers stopped at a cluster of harmonics. "You should do it." "I can't leave now," she said. "You know that." "I have to work." He turned his head slightly toward her sound. "I don't think you should have to choose." That room was intimate, which made the walls seem even thinner. But the house had ears. The walls featured portraits, and these portraits bore the unblinking gaze of a lineage that valued its order. The order was clean. The order was known. Their small rebellion, their talk of life beyond the house, was soft. Still, in a place where reputation was measured in inches, softness was volatile. Aaliyah found, the next morning, tucked behind a stack of old client letters, a creamy envelope with Ethan's name on it. No stamp, no return address. She opened it in the pantry when no one else was watching. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an unfamiliar, precise hand. "Do not trust the neurologist alone. There is more than the medical file." She read it twice, then 3 times, as if the words could rearrange into sense. Her thumb traced the ink like a blind person would read the coast of a map. She wondered, who would send him warnings? Who would risk his ire by sending secrets? Her chest tightened with that particular domestic fear. Secrets in the Caldwell household were like embers. If you smothered them, they could still flare. At the hospital, Dr. Helen Park sat across from Ethan in her small office, listening. She was a woman who wore competence like a lens. Her hands had the steady patience of someone who had seen a lot of human bodies fail and try to make sense of it. Ethan described episodes, moments when light felt like pressure at the back of his head, or when distant glints felt like phantom keys. Dr. Park kept notes. She ordered tests, including MRIs, blood panels, and a retinal scan. Her tone remained professional, but her eyes betrayed a curiosity that bordered on worry. "You don't want to build your life around hope without cause, Ethan," she said one afternoon, leaning forward. "But medicine doesn't have to be fatalistic." "We investigate," he asked. "What if the test says nothing?" She considered him, then said, "Then we keep looking. Sometimes the body hides what we expect it to reveal." The MRI report came back with an ambiguous note. No gross lesion observed. "Recommend further electrophysiology." To Ethan and Aaliyah, the language was both reassurance and threat. No lesion meant no neat answer. No neat answer meant endless possibility, some of it hopeful, some of it dangerous. At night, Ethan dreamed of darkness with edges. In the morning, he woke with a memory that tasted like a dream. Back at the estate, Richard worked on the problem of image and influence. To him, Ethan's condition was both a personal sorrow and a public liability. A blind heir could humanize a fortune. He could also complicate marriages, deals, and the tidy narratives of legacy. He hired consultants who spoke in marketing terms. He accepted invitations to panels about disability and philanthropy with the casualness of a man putting on gloves. "You'll be at the gala next month," he told Ethan while they overlooked the city from the study. The skyline was framed like a painting. "We'll have cameras. It will be good for the foundation." Ethan listened. "Do you want me there because you want to show the world you care, or because you want to be praised for it?" Richard's jaw tightened. "We do things differently in this family. It's part of our responsibility." Ethan felt something like anger and something like sorrow rolled together. For years, he had been taught to present himself as an emblem, something the world could admire from a distance. He wanted to be a person who could choose to speak for himself. One afternoon, as Aaliyah swept the sunroom, she found a photograph tucked in the piano bench. It was old, an image of Ethan with a small boy, a mop of hair that resembled Marcus Jr.'s. The bottom corner had a date in faded ink and a name she did not recognize. Samuel Caldwell, 1998. She turned the photo over and saw a message scratched on the back in pencil. "Don't let them forget." Her hands changed temperature. Someone had left a breadcrumb in a place thought private. That night, Aaliyah lay awake in her small apartment, listening to the building breathe. She thought about the envelope, the MRI, and the photograph. The world they lived inside was an onion, many layers, each with a sting. She considered the risk of touching on other people's stories. She thought about Ethan's thumb, the feel of his hand when he accepted a cup. She traced the line of the photograph's date like a question. People did not like too many questions. Questions threatened the tidy narrative. Questions were the kind of thing neighbors whispered about when they wanted to be dangerous without paying a cost. She made a small private plan. She would enroll in night classes. She would learn to stitch a way out for herself. And she would watch. Mini Cliffhanger 4, End of Setup. As Aaliyah set an extra place at her kitchen table the next morning, out of habit, out of hope, her phone buzzed. A text came without a name. "Stop watching. Move away from the Caldwell property. For your child's safety." The message had no number. She looked at Marcus, who had come by to drop off a camera lens. His eyes widened. For the first time, she saw panic settle into the edges of his face. "Who would do that?" she asked him. Marcus shrugged, but his fingers tightened around the bag of lenses. "People who want to keep stories buried," he said. "Or people who think secrets cost less than truth." Aaliyah reread the message. Her thumb hovered above the screen. She thought of the photograph, the envelope, the MRI, the man who made philanthropy sound like armor. She thought of Ethan's thumb rubbing the skin beneath his eye in the ballroom. She thought of the tiny impossible light she had felt, like a door opening for a single heartbeat. She heard the city outside, loud and alive, and she realized, with a clarity that felt like wind, that their lives were crossing a line. The house had always been a place of rules. Now the rules were changing. They met in places where light was dim enough to keep words soft. The coffee shop on Auburn Avenue had cracked leather seats and a jukebox that hummed in the corners. Marcus chose a booth that faced the door. He liked to watch people enter. The rhythm of arrivals told him more than headlines. Nervous men who walked too fast. Women with purpose that carried the echo of a sermon. Teenagers who treated adulthood like a rumor. Ethan came with his cane, and his breath matched the steps. He read the room by sound, by the scrape of chairs, the clink of cups, the low exhale of a busker downstairs tuning his guitar. He sat with the cane across his knees like a man holding a sword. "Who did you show the photograph to?" he asked after the first bland pleasantries. His voice was plain, unweighted, except for a current under it. "Aaliyah." Marcus folded his hands. "She showed me. She's worried." "So are you." Ethan's fingers found the edge of the table. "Did you go through the city records?" Marcus smiled, a quick, tired tilt. "I know a woman who knows a woman. I dug. There's a Samuel Caldwell listed as trustee in several deeds from 1996 to 2002. No immediate red flags. But there are gaps. People are leaving invoices unpaid. One older name keeps showing up in payrolls, house assistants, but then vanishes." Ethan exhaled. "Vanishing how?" "Removed from ledgers. Or filed under a pseudonym," Marcus said. His mouth tightened. "Archivists hide things when the money gets involved." Across town, Richard Caldwell bought certainty the way other men bought golf clubs, expensive and meant to be shown off. He had hired a security firm with gray suits and flat faces. Cameras, he had been told, were comfort. They made him feel less like a man who had to answer and more like a man who made answers. He installed more lights. He tightened the gate. The city was a chessboard, and he liked the way the pieces fell when he flicked his wrist. At the hospital, Dr. Helen Park called Ethan in for another test. She placed electrodes along his scalp and around his eyes. The laboratory smelled of antiseptic and machine oil, clinical smells that made the body feel examinable and smaller. "You were told no gross lesion," she said before the test. Her pen clicked like a metronome. "No lesion," Ethan answered. "But there was a moment, a touch," he said. A touch that felt like a window opening. Dr. Park's eyes narrowed. She was a physician first, a person second. "We can look for evoked potentials. We can test how the optic nerve and brain respond to various forms of stimulation. However, I must warn you, those tests are not perfect. And if we find anomalous activity, it's not always easy to interpret." Ethan's hand clenched. "Interpret it for me." She set the electrodes. "We'll try." The machines hummed. A technician called out numbers like small prayers. The screen moved in soft waves. At one point, the lights in the lab dimmed and a spike stuttered across the monitor, an unexpected bloom. Dr. Park blinked, then frowned. "That's something," she murmured. "Not enough to explain everything, but enough to be curious." She wrote a note in the chart. "Consider trial of tactile provocation under controlled conditions." Ethan left the lab with a map of possibilities in his head. He could feel like a breadcrumb trail, something that was not yet a path. Back at the house, Aaliyah scanned the piano bench again, this time in daylight when the house felt less staged. She ran her fingers over the varnish. The photograph's edges were still warm from where she had fingered it the night before. She swallowed the fear that wanted to be louder and folded it into muscle memory. There were nights when fear felt like a second skin. Nights when whispers turned into soundtracks and shadows into people. The anonymous messages kept arriving. The phone, when it chirped, made her whole body respond like a startled animal. She had not told Marcus everything. She had not told Ethan the envelope's handwriting. Secrets had weight. They asked for silence, and in exchange, they threatened everything. Marcus brought a small camera to Aaliyah's kitchen one afternoon, a vintage rangefinder. He had adapted to make clear not just images, but close readings of paper and ink. "Let's see who wrote it," he said. Setting the device like a surgeon readying a scalpel, Aaliyah laid the envelope under the lamp. The ink was delicate and precise. Marcus adjusted the lens. The camera recorded the slant, the pressure, the idiosyncratic way a cross on a T met the shaft of the letter. He frowned. "It's a professional hand, someone who writes carefully. This is not random." "Someone who wanted to be read and yet not known," Aaliyah said. "Which means whoever sent it has reach," Marcus replied. "They can access the house. Or they have someone who can." They both knew, without saying it, what that meant. The security company called Marcus's phone 2 days later. A man with a voice like a ledger asked if Marcus had been near Caldwell's property the previous week. Marcus lied. He said no. The man said, "Do that again and we will report you." Marcus put the phone down and felt his palms go cold. He could hear the camera's shudder in his head as if it had become a metronome counting down. Ethan convened his own small council in the music room. The room smelled of lemon oil and old paper. Marcus was there. Similarly, Olivia Carter, who worked as an advocate at a nonprofit specializing in displacement and tenant rights, was also affected. Olivia had been cautious at first. There are many stories in the city, and many people who wanted to be heard. But when Ethan had reached out after a reading at the arts space, she had felt the kind of pull that requires action rather than judgment. "You want to know more than medicine can tell you," Olivia said plainly. She had no false reverence for wealth or for pity. "If there's a history here, if someone tried to hide something, you need to document it. You need to make the story undeniable." "How?" Ethan asked. "Without making things worse for people who work for them?" Olivia's jaw worked. "You make the evidence public. You protect sources. You use the law and the people who know how to use it. You don't let a narrative be written for you." Marcus rubbed his chin. "We need records, payrolls, old photographs, names and dates. If Samuel Caldwell's records were scrubbed, then we need witnesses, people who remember." Aaliyah's voice was small. "I can ask around, quietly. Some women worked here before me. They have stories that aren't for lunchroom gossip. They tell the truth when trust is offered." "Trust is expensive," Olivia said, "but we can build it." She pulled a folder from her bag, containing contacts, a plan, and a list of legal nonprofits that offer protection for whistleblowers. "We'll need a safe place to store copies, a backup plan. If something happens, we go public." Ethan listened. He wanted to be the kind of man who could do this without collateral damage. He tried to justify risk with moral clarity. The problem with courage was that it didn't come with a label. Courage was messy. It required decisions that left people exposed. They drew diagrams on paper. Who could be trusted? Who could be questioned? What could be done without exposing Aaliyah's son or other domestic workers? The map of the city became a map of risk. They planned to request public records for Samuel Caldwell's land deals. They planned to ask old contractors for old ledgers. They planned to set up a locked drive that an independent journalist could access in case the worst happened. Then, Marcus said, and he used his hands the way he used a camera lens, narrowing. "Focusing? We create an event that forces a narrative, something public where press statements can't easily drown the truth." Ethan felt the plan like electricity. "The gala," he said. They all looked at him. The gala was Richard's playground, an event with cameras, donors, and talking heads. It would be perfect and terrifying. "If what you want is to expose," Olivia said, "the place where everyone will be watching is the place we use. But you need something undeniable, proof, a witness, medical evidence too, if possible." She looked at Dr. Park's name on the paper. "Can Dr. Park testify to the anomaly if it's reproducible?" Dr. Park agreed to a controlled provocation under her supervision, if Ethan consented. She wanted records that she could explain to a peer or a court, if necessary. The tests would be done in a clinic. Dr. Park's tone held both professional caution and a twitch of hope. The night before the first controlled test, someone ransacked the room where Aaliyah kept personal documents at the Caldwell estate. Notebooks were rifled. A small lockbox was cracked open and left empty. Aaliyah found it in a pile of returned cushions, her hands trembling as if she had touched something electric. She thought of the anonymous messages and the envelope again. She realized someone was watching not only them, but the places they trusted for solace. They set up the clinic with care. Dr. Park's team arranged for privacy, cameras, and legal observers to be present. Ethan agreed to the tactile provocation. They would replicate the simple rubbing Aaliyah had done in the ballroom under sterile conditions so the machines could record every response. There were lawyers present. Olivia insisted on it, and Marcus documented with his camera for backup. When Aaliyah entered the clinical room, she smelled of laundromat soap and the faint, honest heat of human motion. She felt small. She had never signed consent forms that carried such significant consequences. She worried about being blamed. She worried about losing her job. She worried about Marcus Jr. Allie, Ethan said when she sat opposite him. The sound of his name and his voice settled her. You don't have to do this. She met his voice with a steadiness she did not feel. You helped me when I needed it, she said. I can do this for you. Dr. Park explained the steps. Robots of instrumentation hummed like distant insects. The cameras recorded angles from 3 sides. There was a lawyer on the phone. Aaliyah closed her eyes. Her thumb found the soft skin under Ethan's eye, and she rubbed the small way she had in the ballroom, light, uncertain, as if testing a pulse. For a moment, there was the same thin light he had once described as a window. But this time the cameras were on. The monitors erupted with a pattern different from anything Dr. Park had seen that afternoon. Electrodes recorded a spike. The technician swallowed. Record everything, Dr. Park ordered. Her voice was steady but sharp. This may be more than anecdote. Ethan's chest felt like it was full of music, notes that had no name. He wanted to say something, thank you, don't, stop. But the words tangled. As soon as they left the clinic, Olivia's phone buzzed with an anonymous email. It read, "You're meddling where you don't belong, stop." The email had a header that traced to a server in the city. Marcus traced the header. It bounced through private company servers and then went dark. The sender knew how to conceal their identity. They escalated with caution. Olivia connected them to a journalist who specialized in investigative pieces about legacy wealth. She agreed to take a look at the documents in the locked drive, under one condition. They had to make sure Aaliyah and Ethan were safe before any public piece ran. The journalist, Naomi Reyes, had a reputation for careful legal prep. She insisted on corroboration. They dug deeper. Marcus crawled through old city housing board minutes in basements that smelled of mildew and forgotten bureaucracy. He found a mention of a settlement in 1999 that referenced a quiet relocation of a family from Brookhaven to alternative accommodation, with a note that the case was resolved privately. The language was oblique, evasive. It felt like a seam that could be pried open with enough leverage. Aaliyah remembered a rumor her mother used to whisper about a boy who had once been brought into the house, someone who had been taught to keep quiet. The rumor felt like a knot behind her sternum. She carried it like a warning. Inside the Caldwell house, Richard felt the pressure. Men in suits came to brief him. They showed him memos offering options, payoffs, PR statements, and a medical team to handle Ethan's condition without public surprise. Control the narrative, one advisor said, with the confidence of someone who had built a life on smoothing edges. Richard's hand closed on the memo as if it were a weapon. Do it, he said. The word came soft, deadly. That night, someone left a white envelope at the gate for Aaliyah's neighbor, a note with a single line. Leave the house, or the cost will be more than your wages. It was meant to be a whisper. It landed as a blow. Aaliyah held the note and tasted fear like metal. She told no one at first. She put the note under Marcus's camera lens and had him make a copy of it. She wanted proof. Proof was a talisman against being gaslit. They rehearsed plans like actors rehearsing a play where the stakes were real. If they were going public at the gala, they needed a narrative, evidence, and a way to protect Aaliyah. They rehearsed what to say. They practiced the sequence of the clinic recordings. They planned where Ethan would speak, how Naomi would present documents, and who would stand with them. But plans have a brittle edge. The harsher life had taught them that the parts of a plan that would break were the parts that involved hearts. 2 nights before the gala, Marcus broke into a storage unit he believed to hold old Caldwell invoices. He told himself it was a harmless salvage of public records. The unit smelled of dust and old paper. He found a box labeled Samuel Caldwell, personal. Inside were photographs, a child's shoe, and letters written in ink that smudged with time. At the bottom of the box was a picture of Samuel Caldwell with a black woman he did not recognize. Someone behind him coughed. A steel voice said, "You have no right here." Marcus spun. A security guard from the unit's company stood in the doorway. Marcus swallowed. His palms were slick. He pretended to be a client. The guard watched him for too long. Marcus walked out with a single envelope in his pocket and a heartbeat that felt like it might not stop. By then, the city was leaning forward. Word traveled in barbed whispers. People on the block watched for changes in routine. Aaliyah stopped walking Marcus Jr. to the corner store alone. Ethan's house seemed smaller when the world pressed in. On the eve of the gala, they met in the church basement, the kind of place that smelled like old hymnals and polish. The walls were a patchwork of community posters and flyers for health clinics. Naomi Reyes arrived with a lawyer. Olivia was there, hands folded like a prayer. Marcus's eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. Aaliyah held Marcus Jr. quiet on her lap, his small head heavy against her collarbone. "We go in with the evidence," Naomi said. "We do not let them gaslight us with money or lawyers. We file copies with the state archives. We notify press contacts. We prepare protective affidavits for any witness." Ethan's voice cut through the low murmur. "If we do this, there will be fallout. People will get hurt. I want everyone to know that I am aware of this. I will not be the one who sends anyone running. If you want me to stop, tell me now." Silence answered him. Olivia's eyes were hard. "We are all risking something," she said. "But the alternative is letting them keep burying." Aaliyah thought of the note, the white envelope at the gate, the phone threats. She thought of the look on Samuel Caldwell's photo. She felt small and enormous at once. "Let's change a thing," she said, and her voice was steady as a bell. "Let's change one thing." They slept badly that night. Outside, the city breathed, worried, and kept its own secrets. Inside them, plans moved like coiled things, and somewhere in the dark, Richard Caldwell crushed a telephone beneath his palm and made another call. They rolled out the red carpet like a promise. Lights cut the night into flares. Flashbulbs popped. Champagne glasses chimed. The gala was a cathedral of polished intentions. Donors in satin, speeches in rehearsed humility, cameras hunting for the perfect human interest frame. Richard Caldwell glided through it like a king at a coronation. His smile was carved. His hands made gestures that meant control. Ethan stood in the back of the ballroom by the piano. He felt the room first, footsteps, the shift of a dress, the whisper of a lapel as a man leaned in to tell a joke. He breathed in the air, roses, lemon oil, a trace of cigarette someone had left on a balcony. His cane tapped a rhythm on marble. Tonight he was meant to be a symbol, the blind heir who had overcome. Tonight they wanted the image of warmth and righteous charity. Tonight the cameras would look for a picture they could sell. Aaliyah stood near the staff entrance. Her tray was gone. Her hands trembled in a way she tried to hide. Marcus was in the crowd, camera around his neck, pretending to be a guest. Naomi Reyes sat stiffly at a long table with a laptop, legal pads, and a small stack of backup drives. Olivia had vanished into the press pit to ensure the lights were controlled. Dr. Park hovered just off stage like a lighthouse, ready to guide if the sea turned. Stormy, they had rehearsed everything until the lines blurred into bone. How Ethan would step to the podium, how Naomi would present the documents, and how Marcus would cue the footage on the projector so that the room couldn't look away. How Olivia would stand with witnesses, and how the journalists would need to print what they saw. And at the center of it all, a clinical recording that captured what happened when Aaliyah rubbed Ethan's eye. Proof, if the machines told the truth. The gala smelled of lemon and expensive breath. The chandelier sang. The orchestra played a tune meant to lift spirits and encourage wallets to be pulled out of pockets. Guests laughed on cue. Ethan felt the current of expectation like static under his skin. He thought of the envelope that had warned them. He thought of the note tucked in the piano bench. He thought of Marcus Jr. asleep in his mother's apartment. He thought of the photograph of Samuel Caldwell with the unknown woman and the pencil message on the back, "Don't let them forget." He counted steps to the podium in his head. He breathed. He tasted lemon oil and something else, metal maybe, or fear. He stepped forward when the MC made a speech about empathy and the cultural importance of visibility. "Cameras swung to him like planets aligning. Ethan Caldwell," the MC said, smooth as glass. "Please share a word about the Foundation's work." Short sentence. The lights hit him. The crowd sharpened into a single sound. His cane scraped. He felt the stage under his shoes. He felt the microphone like a small, cool thing under his fingers. He did not speak about philanthropy. He spoke about people. "My father," Ethan began, his voice calm. "Precise teaches me about stewardship. He teaches me how to manage assets. He teaches me how to make gifts with conditions." A murmur went through the room. A woman near the front made a slight sound of disapproval, like a cork in a bottle that threatened to pop. Ethan's hands rested lightly on the podium. He could not see faces, but he knew them all by the way they breathed. He knew the rustle of expensive clothing. He knew the small intake of breath that signals the first taste of trouble. "I also have a life outside the ledger," he said. "And I have friends who brought me truth." He paused. His pause was a rope thrown into deeper water. He felt the tug. Naomi nodded once at the laptop. Marcus, watching from the crowd, pushed a small remote in his pocket. The projector lights stuttered, and then a pale square of video appeared on the wall behind Ethan. Paper documents unfurled on the screen. Ledgers. Invoices, names crossed out and rewritten. A voice read from a payroll sheet. The voice was careful, legally trained. It lists amounts, dates, and transfers. The camera panned to a ledger with Samuel Caldwell inked in a neat, looping hand, and then scratched out in a darker, heavier mark. The room recognized paper. "It is a trusted paper." The orchestra faded to a hush. Naomi's voice came through the room, amplified and steady. "These are copies from city property records, contractor invoices, and internal memos. They show," she swallowed. "They show that payments were made to firms that specialized in relocation management for properties owned by Caldwell Holdings between 1998 and 2003. They show that one trust, listed under Samuel Caldwell, was quietly moved, and that payments to certain contractors correlate with displacement notices in low-income neighborhoods." A ripple went through the audience. Someone muttered. A philanthropist smacked a palm to his jaw. A journalist scribbled. Ethan felt the air change. He felt the audience lean. He felt Richard at his shoulder like a shadow. Richard's hand was a weight on the rail. He had kept a smile like a door kept closed, but he could not control what was on the wall. He could not erase the ink that had dried into truth. Then Naomi clicked. The image changed. It was no longer just paper. Marcus's footage flickered. A clip from an old contractor meeting captured on a forgotten VHS. Men in suits, a map on a table, a man's voice saying, "We moved them quietly. No press, no fuss, enough to make them go." The camera panned and a hand, Richard's, slid across the table, tapping a contract. There was a collective intake of breath. The way waves take on wind. Short sentences now, quick, punchy. Someone gasped. The room went thick. Richard's face, a flicker of panic. He straightened. The camera laughed at him. No, observed him. He leaned forward and mouthed something to his aide. The aide panicked, knitting their brow. Ethan's heart beat fast. He felt the rhythm as if in his throat. He thought of the families who had been moved, cash under the table. Quiet deals. Aaliyah's note about a settlement. He felt anger rise like heat. Why is this important? Naomi's voice asked the room. Because restitution matters. Because people were relocated without notice, often without legal counsel, and sometimes at the direction of firms tied to these payments. Because a man named Samuel Caldwell appears to have been erased from the ledgers, and behind that erasure may be a cover-up. Short pause. A sly sound from the back of the room, someone's nervous laugh. Then Dr. Park stood. She walked to the podium and took the microphone like someone claiming a right. "We have clinical data," she said. "Recorded under controlled conditions. We have reproducible EEG spikes when Mr. Caldwell receives tactile stimulation under specific circumstances. That data is on record, time-stamped, and corroborated. We also have the video from the clinic." Aaliyah was brought forward. She sauntered. Each step felt like a decision. Her palms were steady now. Her tray was gone. Her uniform had been replaced with a plain dress, a deliberate choice to show she was not a servant at this moment. She was a witness. She was a person. Richard's smile was gone. He looked suddenly bare. They placed Ethan in the center of the stage, at the very spot where light would hit his face. Aaliyah took his hand. Her fingers tangled with his like a small prayer. "Do you want to do this?" she whispered. Ethan's reply was a line of honesty. "Yes and no." "But yes." She lifted her thumb to the skin beneath his eye. The room watched, rapt. The camera zoomed. The chandelier turned witnesses into constellations. Aaliyah rubbed, the same slight movement from the ballroom months ago, the same motion that had been an accident. A kindness. The sound of her thumb on skin made no sound in the microphone, but the machines behind the scenes did their work. Monitors hummed. Graphs unfolded. At first, nothing happened. In the audience, someone coughed. People shifted. They expected some manufactured moment, something to be packaged and sold. Then a spike bloomed on the EEG monitors like a star flaring, a soft gasping sound from the tech table. The projector screen behind them filled with a glowing blue pattern that translated into neural activity. Ethan's breath hitched. He felt a pressure behind his eyelids, like a curtain being pushed. He gripped the wood of the podium. His mouth opened, and the world, slow as a film rewound, shook into color. He saw. At first it was shards, light. A woman in a red dress is 2 rows down. A champagne flute catching a glint. He saw the curve of the chandelier. He saw faces, old and new, washing into recognition. They were shapes with details. He had no prism for it, and so each small thing felt enormous. His throat made a sound, a litany of tears. He saw Aaliyah's face, with its freckle at her temple and the tiredness around her eyes, which he had only ever known through tone and touch. He saw Marcus in his rumpled jacket and the nervousness under his smile. He saw Naomi's jaw clench. He saw Dr. Park's anxious, implicated curiosity. He even saw the woman who had made the common comment in the ballroom months ago, her features tight with surprise. Most of all, he saw Richard Caldwell. Richard's face collapsed, much like paper does when folded too many times. In that flash of sight, Ethan watched his father look as if the ground had been taken from him. Richard leapt forward. His mouth moved. He reached for something, an aide, a press handler, a security guard. Short sentences, rapid. Security moved. 2 men in gray suits crossed the room with practiced speed. They did not run. They advanced. Someone at the back shouted, "Control the audio!" A technician lunged for the console. Ethan's sight faltered like a film tearing. Images broke into grain. He tried to hold on to the red of a dress. He tried to memorize a face. He realized he could actually see the projector screen, twisted a few feet from him. And on it, in a loop, a video played. It was footage that had been transferred, Naomi had said, from an old storage locker, grainy but damning. Samuel Caldwell stood at a desk. He argued. He held a letter. The camera caught his hand, stained with ink. Behind him, a man sat, Richard younger leaning forward, too calm. "Samuel." The younger Richard's voice was velvet. "We can make this go away." Samuel's hand was shocked. "You can't erase people with ledger entries," he said. "This is wrong." The frame cut. Then another clip, contractor meetings, invoices, and an address stamped with a relocation notice. The video cut to a night shot of a moving truck. The date stamp, 1999, Ethan's vision steadied enough to read the date on the moving notice. His head slammed into memory. Stories he'd listened to as a child, stories about quiet moves, quiet threats. Richard's face was now a storm. He barked at the top of his lungs. Cut the feed. Cut it now! Security surged toward the projector console. Marcus lunged too. He moved like someone who knew he had to make the most of his time. He stepped between the security guard and the console. He put his body in the way. The guard tried to push him out of the way. Marcus would not move. Olivia shouted into a microphone she had grabbed, her voice finding a frequency the press could not ignore. This is public record. These are the facts. We have copies. We have witnesses. Richard's voice dropped to a low, lethal tone. He barked an order to pull Ethan from the stage. Hands reached for Ethan's chair. Aaliyah grabbed harder. She planted herself like a rock. Ethan's sight came in flashes now. He could see the knot in Richard's neck, the thread of rage that unspooled like a noose. He could see the security guard's ID badge, Caldwell Security, and on it the name that made his stomach flip. Caleb, he read. No. Saw, then the image jolted and the letters blurred. A hand clamped on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus twisted and shoved the man away. It was a chaotic, yet cinematic and precise moment. Glasses fell. A woman screamed. Cameras panned for the most scandalous angle. Then from the balcony above, a voice cut across the clamor like an axe. Stop. The word rang. Heads turned. The word had weight, familiarity, timbre, the kind of voice you don't forget. Samuel Caldwell stepped slowly down the balcony. Stairs! The room froze as if time had been, told to take a breath. It was impossible because Samuel was supposed to be a name on paper, an erasure, a notation in an old ledger. He had been the shadow behind the photograph on the piano bench. He had been a ghost in a handwritten note. He had been the missing piece. He was alive. Short sentence. The gasp, Samuel's hair was streaked with gray. His shoulders were not as erect as the old portrait had promised, but his eyes were clean and sharp. He walked down the aisle between guests as if walking into sunlight. His voice was unmistakable. You don't get to write other people's lives out of existence, he said. He pointed at Richard with a finger that trembled. You don't get to move people so you can sell neighborhoods. You don't get to hide what you did behind foundation names, the crowd muttered. Richard's face was purple. He mouthed something like a denial. Security, he hissed. Samuel held up a stack of papers. I kept copies, he said. I burned my name from the records because I thought it would stop, but I kept copies. I couldn't, his voice broke. He made himself go on. I kept copies because they were not my secrets to bury. Naomi was already moving. She strode forward and met Samuel at the base of the stage. She took some of the papers from him, fingers scanning, eyes flicking. This corroborates what we found, she said into her microphone. We have documents, dated signatures, and contractor invoices. Richard's face crumpled into 1,000 small decisions. He lunged for Samuel. Security closed ranks like a net. Aaliyah stepped in front of Ethan. Marcus shoved at the nearest guard and knocked him backward. Someone snapped a photo. Get them out, Richard barked. Remove those papers, file suit. Call the police, this is defamation. Short sentence, punch, breath. Samuel did not flinch. He held the papers out to the cameras as if they were relics. These families lost their homes, he said. They lost their lives. I stand here because I could not live with what we did. I paid for it. I tried to fix it. He looked directly at Ethan, and for a second the room narrowed to 3 people. Samuel, Ethan, Aaliyah. Ethan saw Samuel and felt the line of history snap into place. He saw the woman in Samuel's old photograph. She was in the crowd too, standing now at the back. Her face was older, but the cheekbones were the same. She clapped slowly, once, like someone finishing a prayer. Richard's control collapsed like an old wall. He shouted into a phone. Men in suits argued. The gala had become an unfolding narrative no PR team could button up. Then the final, sharp twist. On the projector screen, Naomi cued a clip that no one had expected to play. It was from a nanny cam-style tape Naomi had gotten from a contractor who'd been paid extra to strip the piano room of certain items in 2001. The footage was crude, time-stamped and taken at night. The camera showed 2 men in coats moving boxes. One of them, clearly, was the present-day Richard Caldwell, younger but unmistakable. He shoved a small chest under his jacket. The chest had a label, The label read, Samuel Caldwell, personal. The chest moved. The men argued. The younger Richard shoved the chest back. But the other man, Samuel, grabbed it. You can't hide him, Samuel said into the dark. A moment later, the clip showed a voice file, an audio overlay Naomi had added. It was a recording of a man's voice reading a short note. If they come for me, tell them the ledger is wrong. Tell them I am here. The voice was Samuel's. Ethan's sight narrowed to the label on the chest. He saw an ink smear and the edges of a photo tucked inside. Familiar. For the first time, he saw the photograph's detail that had been hidden in the piano bench. Samuel with the woman, both smiling in a summer light. Everything snapped into place. The photograph, the envelope, the empty lockbox, the ransacked notebooks, the payments, the quiet moves. Now the company's signatures were live on screen. Now the memos were undeniable. The room was a volcano. Security tried to seize the drives. Marcus shoved one into his bag and ran. Naomi screamed to stop. Aaliyah fell to her knees to steady Ethan, whose frame trembled with the strain of holding on to sight. He could already feel it slipping. He could see just enough to know the pain of loss would return like a tide. Samuel moved closer to the stage, hands open like someone who had lost things and wanted to give them back. He looked at Richard. You were offered a choice, Samuel said. You took profit. For the first time in a long time, the room was silent, not with money, but with surprise. Guests who had been practicing outrage now had to choose where to stand. The press snapped pictures. The cameras spun like compasses. Then a new, darker thing happened. A man from Richard's security detail reached for Samuel. There was another sound, a whisper of metal, and then a stronger voice, unexpected and impossible. Stop! It was Olivia. She stepped forward and folded herself between Samuel and the guard. She had a recording in her hand, legal counsel. She began to read the rights aloud, like a list of bullet points calling the media to witness. She invoked protections for whistleblowers. Her voice was steady. Her legal work had prepared her for this impossible second. The security guard faltered. The law carried weight here, respected even by money. Richard's assistant whispered urgently into his ear. Ethan's sight went white. For a moment, the world was an unfinished photograph. He saw only blurs and then darkness. He felt the wetness on his cheeks where tears had fallen. He held Aaliyah's hand like the only solid thing in the room. Short pause. The silence that followed was as big as an ocean. The projector screen froze on a frame showing Richard's hand, signing an order. The timestamp behind it was from 20 years ago. The noise in the room came in soft pieces. People talked in undertones as if afraid to wake something terrible. Ethan listened. He heard his father's voice for the first time in a new register, urgent, pleading, not commanding. Samuel! Richard's voice cracked across the room. I can explain. It was for the company. For the future. Samuel's face hardened. Explain to who? He said. Those who were moved? Those whose lives you sold? Ethan wanted to say something. He wanted to be the son who understood what truly mattered. But his sight had gone. He had lost the map as quickly as he had found it. What remained was anger and aching clarity. Aaliyah bent and put her forehead against his knuckles. She whispered a single fierce thing into his ear. You saw, she said. Hold that! He held it as a ledger. He held it like a map on fire. He held it as the truth. Outside the room, sirens began to wail, distant at first and then closer. Someone in the crowd had called the police, or maybe Richard had. Either way, the night would now be documented by law enforcement as it was by cameras and hearts. Mini cliffhanger. The final blow of the climax. As officers poured through the doors, a man in a gray suit, one of Richard's closest advisors, slipped something small into his pocket. A flash of metal, a folded piece of paper. He kept his eyes down. No one saw him. Not yet. The room buzzed like an unsettled hive. People picked sides. Hands were raised. Words were shouted. The gala had become a courtroom, a confessional, and a battlefield that no one had anticipated. Ethan sat down on the stage, exhausted and stunned. He could still feel light at the edges of his vision. He had seen just enough. He had seen his father. He had seen the ledger. He had seen the faces of the people whose company had hurt. He had seen Samuel, alive, standing, human and broken and brave. The cameras kept filming, and in the press of hands, in the shuffle of shoes, in the whisper of legal papers, one small thing moved, a slip of paper in a security advisor's pocket that would not remain secret for long. They led with facts. Then they let the facts breathe. The next 48 hours moved like a city held in a storm. Cameras that had only wanted spectacle now wanted accountability. Journalists descended. Naomi Reyes sat at her desk and turned raw footage into a timeline. Olivia fastened legal pads into neat stacks and dialed contacts at the state attorney's office. Marcus worked the angles, camera still in hand, extracting the single frame where a man in a gray suit slipped a folded paper into his pocket. He blew it up, enhanced it. The image was grainy and human, but it told a story. The advisor's face, the subtle curl of his hand, the moment before he vanished into the crowd. Short sentence. Evidence matters. Within 24 hours, subpoenas arrived. The city mailed a notice for an emergency review of Caldwell Holdings' recent transactions. A civil rights group announced that it would pursue a class action lawsuit if necessary. News anchors replayed the gala on loop. Someone had finally given them a narrative that wasn't polished but raw. Ledgers, video, a whistleblower named Samuel, and a clinical recording from Dr. Park that suggested something the medical world had a hard time naming. Richard Caldwell's calm cracked. He held press conferences that smelled of lawyer-scented PR. He denied intent. These were business decisions, he told cameras, his voice low and practiced. If anyone was harmed, I regret it. The words landed like a thin coat of paint over a burning building. People watched. People heard the way his hands trembled when he reached for notes. It did not look like remorse so much as desperation. Police visited the estate. They asked questions in rooms that had once felt like sanctuaries. They moved with the bureaucratic patience of people who were familiar with the process. Agents from the Financial Crimes Unit combed through electronic records. The company's board met in closed-door sessions. Boards are places people hide when public light grows hot. Meanwhile, the community stirred. Families who had been moved years ago, whose faces had been a rumor in Aaliyah's childhood, came forward. One woman, Lillian Price, whose trailer had been packed in the rain in 1999, sat in Naomi's office and read aloud a receipt she had kept. A check, an address, a stamped notice. Her hands shook, not for the camera, but because memory had weight. Short pause. A moment that felt like a slight beating of wings. Samuel Caldwell testified publicly on local radio and then in a packed hearing room. He spoke without pretense. He told the story of ledgers altered, of moral decisions made for profit. He said of his attempt to erase his name from the records because he was afraid of the men he had once trusted. His voice broke when he said, "I kept copies because I could not sleep." The state opened an investigation into Caldwell Holdings. It was not a single thing. It was an unspooling. Contracts traced, transfers analyzed, campaign contributions re-examined. The firm that had handled the relocations came under scrutiny. The same contractors who had benefited found themselves fielding questions. People who had been small in the old system suddenly found leverage in the tiniest scrap of paper. Dr. Helen Park's data was subpoenaed. Her EEG recordings, time-stamped, corroborated by video and a clinic log, became part of a dossier. Medical experts called by both sides debated the meaning. Neurologists parsed spikes and potentials. Ethicists argued about spectacle and consent. The oddness of the clinical finding made it headline-worthy and maddeningly technical all at once. But the human piece, Aaliyah's thumb, the tiny tender motion, remained what people could understand without jargon. Ethan listened to the arguments play out like a symphony he could not see. He had moments of clear sight now, and moments of dense fog. The doctors called it fluctuation. He called it living between two worlds. He walked the city slowly with Marcus at his side, feeling its textures, tasting the heat and cold of streets he had known only by echo. He also felt the public's gaze, which was not always kind. Trolls surfaced online to defend the wealthy or to attack the witnesses. A smear appeared, an old photograph doctored, an attempt to rewrite the moment into something tawdry. Naomi and Olivia fought back with archives, with verifiable timestamps, and with the man who could corroborate, Samuel. Each time a lie tried to burrow, they pulled it out by the roots and showed it to the light. Short sentence. Truth spread slowly and with noise. In the legal arena, actions were quick and messy. A temporary restraining order froze some of Caldwell Holdings' assets. The company's stock, if it had been public, would have tanked. Instead, the board moved to distance itself from Richard. He was asked to step down pending investigation. Men with polished shoes who had once smiled at his parties now cataloged their own exits. Corporate shame is a tidy thing when you have wealth to buffer the blow. Still, reputational damage is not a currency that can be easily repurchased. Publicly, Richard's empire felt smaller. He had lost the narrative. He had been forced into the role every empire fears, defendant. The most challenging aspect of justice is that it often seems too slow. Lawsuits moved like glaciers. However, on a smaller scale, families received letters. City council members convened hearings, and a committee recommended that Caldwell Holdings fund a restitution program for displaced families. Aaliyah's life split into before and after. She had kept working at the estate through the first days of the storm because she needed income. But the household had changed. Some staff resigned out of fear. Others, emboldened by the evidence and the public attention, demanded protections. Olivia worked with a non-profit to secure housing vouchers for those who had been displaced and to establish legal protections for witnesses, including Aaliyah and the older house staff members who now wished to speak. Ethan did not want favors. He did not like the applause of a patron. He wanted justice to mean something that lasted. He used his voice in interviews with an economy of words. He spoke about accountability, about reparations that healed, not performative checks. He announced publicly, on a rooftop, with Naomi filming and Marcus photographing, that he would establish a community trust with input and governance from the affected neighborhoods. It would not be a foundation that writes press releases. It would be a fund governed by a council that includes former residents and workers. Aaliyah stood beside him when he made the announcement. She did not stand as a token of respect. She stood because the community council chose her to steward a grant for workforce training and education, money coming in part from Caldwell Holdings as the company negotiated settlements. Ethan named her as a trustee. Her hands trembled less now. She felt the sharp, sudden bloom of vindication, mixed with a sorrow that no amount of money could soothe. Short sentence. Vindication costs. There were arrests. Late night, careful, procedural. Richard was questioned, then later charged with conspiracy to manipulate corporate records and with fraud tied to the displacement contracts. His security advisor, the man in the gray suit, exposed in Marcus's photograph, was detained after an internal audit revealed discrepancies, and the picture was shown to investigators. The folded paper, the small thing he had slipped into his pocket, turned out to be a list, names, dates, and address. Marcus's frame, Naomi's persistence, and a city camera angle had made the paper legible enough for detectives. Small things, when photographed, become evidence of something. Samuel's testimony carried weight because it was supported by written documentation. The city did not have to take his word alone. It had ledger entries, invoices, motion pictures, and a medical recording that drew people's attention to the human stakes. The community gathered. They organized a modest ceremony at the community center where Lillian Price lived. People came with casserole dishes and folding chairs. They came to meet Samuel, to see Ethan, to hear Aaliyah speak. The mood was complicated, gladness braided with grief. People hugged. There were tears, not all of them joyful. Aaliyah walked the room like someone wearing a borrowed crown. Children clustered around Marcus, the photographer. Naomi sat back and watched the images of the gala and the hearing scroll across her laptop. Olivia fielded calls from people who wanted to know how to protect whistleblowers, Dr. Park. Took quiet calls from colleagues who wanted to study the clinical findings. Ethan sat in the front row with a cane at his side and a notebook open. He had not become someone else because of sight for a few hours. He was still Ethan, Complex, sentimental, flawed. He had seen a truth and had decided to fight for it in a way that used his life as leverage. At the end of the community gathering, Samuel took the stage and read out the names. Names of people who had lost their homes, and names of those who had survived the quiet move. For each name, someone in the crowd rang a small bell. The sound was thin and clean, and it made the room feel like a ledger finally balancing. Short sentence. Bells call, but not everything is settled. Legal battles smoldered. Richard's attorneys filed motions, hinting at potential counterclaims. The press found angles that magnified the least sympathetic moments. Online trolls did what trolls do. The medical community debated the interpretation. None of this offered a neat, movie-like ending, and Ethan's sight remained uncertain. Dr. Park warned them gently that neurological conditions are rarely cinematic. Recovery, if it came, might be partial at best. He might have windows of sight. He might lose it again. But the fact that he had seen, if even for a time, changed how he walked through the world. It changed the way he felt about being seen. The story was threaded into the city's memory. People spoke of how a maid's slight touch and a whistleblower's courage had shifted a narrative that had been bought and tidied for decades. They discussed how money could not easily erase human testimony when photos and recordings existed. They discussed the power of unlikely alliances, house staff, a photographer, a neurologist, an investigative journalist, and a man who decided his name could not be used to conceal other people's lives. One evening, after court sessions and press, Ethan visited the piano room. The bench still held the photograph. He touched the varnish where Aaliyah's fingers had once rested. He did not yet know if he would keep the sight he'd had. He knew only the exactness of feeling and the sharpness of a promise he intended to keep. Aaliyah came in with a small box in her hands, a scholarship application form she had filled out in the late hours between shifts. She placed it on the piano. "You should apply," Ethan said. She looked at him. "For what?" "For anything you want," he replied. He smiled, short and honest. "You earned it," she laughed, small and incredulous. "I did what any mother does." "You did more," he said. "You changed how I see things." They both knew how fragile that sentence was. They both knew how truth had teeth. Short pause. A soft, held breath. Outside, the city carried on. A lawsuit would take months. Lives would rearrange slowly. But in the center of that long arc, something had shifted. People who once felt invisible had been named. Names were powerful. They make histories that are hard to erase. As the night settled, Marcus photographed the two of them at the piano. He captured Aaliyah's hands and Ethan's profile, as well as the small, stubborn light in both of their faces. The image was simple. Two people who had been brave enough to let truth get messy. There remained questions. There always would. Could a wealthy empire be truly reformed from within? Would restitution heal the years? Could sight be more than an anecdote? Those questions would be answered slowly, in courtrooms and community meetings, and the tiny businesses that reopened where houses had once stood. But for the moment, in the quiet after the storm, people sat with slight, steady relief. There was grief for what was lost and a fierce gratitude for what they had found. In the months that followed, Richard's legal strategy underwent a change. He hired new counsel and discussed settlements in whispers. Somewhere, in a private conference room, a document awaited a signature that could change the scale of restitution, or limit it. The ink had not yet dried. The city waited. The community watched. Justice had been set in motion. But motion is not arrival. The road ahead remained long. They say justice is a long road. That's true, but roads begin with steps. Short sentence. Shorter ones sometimes cut deeper than paragraphs. Ethan saw for a breath. He saw what many had tried to hide. The sight itself did not solve everything. It did not erase pain or make apologies mean less or more automatically. What it did was force an encounter. It made the abstract concrete. It put faces where there had been ledger lines. It turned erasure into a story someone could no longer ignore. Aaliyah's thumb was small. Her choice was simple. Her courage was complicated. She did not plan to be a hero. She planned to be kind. The world treated her kindness like a risk. She accepted that risk because she believed a person's life could not be reduced to a job description or a pay stub. Her bravery was not a sensational headline. It was steady work, 1,000 tiny decisions stacked until a house could no longer hide its rot. Marcus kept taking pictures. Naomi kept filing. Olivia kept calling lawyers. Dr. Helen Park kept asking uncomfortable medical questions. Samuel kept carrying his shame like a debt he finally chose to pay. Each person did less than movie things, saved copies, sat in hearings, answered questions, felt fear, then acted anyway. Their actions compounded. The result was not instant salvation. It was work that changed the ledger. Short sentence. Truth needs witnesses. There are several truths here, and they are not neat. Power will always try to smooth corners. Wealth will still buy a narrative more easily than lack does. Systems favor the comfortable, and yet systems are built by people. People can be argued with. People can be exposed. People can be held accountable. That is where courage lives. In the gray rooms where rules are written, and in the small kitchens where plans begin. The moral is not simple. It is not a slogan. But here are the bones of it. Names matter. Memory matters. Small acts matter. Evidence matters. Community matters. When those things meet, when a maid's touch, a whistleblower's regret, a journalist's patience, a doctor's data, and a friend's camera all converge, they make a force that money and spin cannot fully absorb. Short sentence. Solid facts win fights that feelings alone cannot. We also learned something about sight. Seeing is physical. Seeing is medical. But seeing is also moral. To see another person is to accept their weight. It's to acknowledge harm and, more importantly, to be willing to act on that knowledge. Ethan's hour of vision was a literal miracle and a moral mirror. It forced him to decide what he would do with the knowledge he gained. Hide it, use it for image, or use it to remake a broken account. He chose the most challenging option, to put what he learned into the service for others. There is danger in this lesson, too. Recklessness can masquerade as righteousness. Exposure without preparation can harm people who are already at risk. That is why the team's care mattered, encompassing legal counsel, secure copies, witness protection, and medical consent. Courage without caution can be cruelty. The work that leads to change must protect the vulnerable first. Short sentence. Protection first. If you take one thing away, let it be this. Small human acts can topple polished empires. Not always instantly, not always cleanly. However, they can initiate processes that lead to accountability, restitution, and new structures that attempt imperfectly to repair what was broken. So ask yourself the hard questions. If you were Ethan, what would you do with a truth that could harm your family but free others? If you were Aaliyah, how would you balance a need for security and the moral urgency of exposing a wrong? If you saw a ledger that erased lives, would you keep quiet or start a record of it? If you work inside systems of power, what would you risk to set things right? Short sentence. Your turn. If this story moved you, tell us. What would you do in their shoes? Which character's choice matters most to you and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe small acts should be amplified, like the video, so more people join the conversation. If you want more stories that dig into injustice and the people who challenge it, subscribe and share. So the following story has a wider witness. Seeing can be a moment. Truth can be a movement. Both require the courage to act when the world asks you to look. What will you do when the cost of seeing becomes your choice?